I'm Madison Carter, and 1 year ago, I was still the family disappointment, the girl they mocked at dinner parties, the one who settled for HR while they built their empire. Or so they thought. They had no idea the company they worshipped, the one they thought they'd pass down like a birthright, had already changed hands. Mine. If you've ever been underestimated by your own family, if you've ever built something powerful in silence, this story is for you. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe, because sometimes the most satisfying revenge is proving you were never the problem. Seattle's fall air was crisp, the kind that felt expensive, like the chilled rosé Aunt Evelyn always insisted on serving before appetizers. The Whitaker family's monthly dinner wasn't just a meal, it was a performance. Crystal glasses aligned like soldiers, silverware polished until it gleamed, and designer coats hung on the backs of high-backed chairs like silent declarations of status. Every detail whispered, "We've made it." And every month, they reminded me I hadn't. I'm Madison Carter, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the one seat at the table that never truly belonged. Still doing that. HR thing. Aunt Evelyn's voice oozed polite condescension as she sliced into her filet mignon with surgical precision. She always said HR like it stood for has regrets. The table chuckled softly, the kind of laughter meant to slice deeper than words ever could. I took a slow sip of cold water, letting it settle something sharp in my chest. What they didn't know, what none of them had bothered to ask, was that HR thing was actually Carter's strategic group, a corporate restructuring firm that I built from the ground up. The same firm that now quietly owns a controlling interest in their beloved company, Whitaker Dynamics. The same firm that, tomorrow morning at 9:00 a.m., would execute a leadership restructure that would leave none of them in charge. Across from me, Chloe Whitaker, my cousin and newly minted senior VP at Whitaker Dynamics, adjusted her Chanel blazer and gave me a smile that looked more like a challenge. Honestly, Madison, with your education, you really could have done so much better. Even a starting position at Whitaker would pay more than HR. She adjusted her pearl necklace like it was a badge of competence. I thought about the corner office I'd just finished decorating, top floor of the glass tower across the street from theirs, the one with the skyline view and the private elevator. I thought about the long nights, the quiet power moves, the legal groundwork, and the hidden acquisitions. I thought about the moment tomorrow when she'd find out I wasn't some failed cousin scraping by in people management. I was the one pulling the strings of her future. I'm comfortable where I am, I said, cutting into my steak. The table moved on, back-patting and praise for Chloe's brilliant leadership and Uncle Robert's upcoming expansion announcement. Not one of them noticed that the storm was already here, wrapped in Armani, sipping water, and smiling. They didn't see it. Not yet. But they would. Chloe Whitaker had always believed in designer diplomacy. Say something cutting, but wear couture so it stings less. That night, she was dressed head to toe in a blush Chanel pantsuit, her long blonde hair pulled into a sleek ponytail that bounced every time she spoke. It was the kind of outfit that said, "I don't just win, I inherit." She leaned toward me with a smile sharp enough to slice through the rarest steak. "You know, Madison," she said, tilting her wine glass just slightly, "if you ever want to come work with real professionals, I might be able to find you something in my department." A pause, just long enough to make sure everyone was listening. "Entry level. Of course," she added. "You'd have to work your way up, like everyone else. Everyone else. Like Chloe, who went from junior analyst to senior VP in under 2 years. Not because of skill, not because of brilliance, but because her last name was Whitaker, and her father ran the company like a family reunion guest list." I took a sip of water. The wine wasn't worth the headache. "Thanks for the offer," I said gently. "But I'm happy where I am." Across the table, Uncle Robert chuckled. The kind of condescending chuckle men use when they think a woman just turned down her last chance at relevance. Well, the door's always open, he said, lifting his glass toward me like he was offering grace. Even family makes mistakes. You don't have to stay in HR forever. I smiled then, not big, not forced, just enough. Because what none of them knew, not Robert, not Chloe, not Evelyn, was that I had already walked through that door, quietly, legally, completely. I didn't need a job offer. I owned the building. The irony, Chloe was sitting there gloating about her promotion. And tomorrow morning, her access badge wouldn't even open her office door. She had no idea that every file in her department had already been audited, every poor decision documented, every mismanaged deal quietly added to the board presentation now sitting on my desk across the street. She went on. Of course. She always did. Talking about her new initiative to modernize operations, mentioning her plans to restructure her team, listing all the ways she was making a real impact at Whittaker Dynamics. The irony was breathtaking. Moments like this used to sting, used to make me question myself, my choices, my path, my worth. I used to wonder if maybe I really was the family disappointment they whispered about after I left the room. But not tonight. Tonight, I let them speak. I let Chloe perform. Because I knew something none of them did. I knew what was coming. From the corner of my eye, I caught the glint of my phone lighting up. Ava Reynolds, my COO. One of the sharpest women I've ever met. If she were texting me now, during dinner, it meant everything was locked, finalized, approved. I placed my phone screen down on the linen tablecloth, next to my steak knife. Let them think I was still just human resources. Let them think I was the quiet one, the one who didn't want more. Let them believe, for one last night, that they were in control. Because tomorrow, when the boardroom doors opened and the signatures hit the paper, Chloe wouldn't be offering me a job. She'd be reading her own termination. The roast duck had just been served when my phone buzzed again, twice, short and deliberate. Ava never called twice, not unless it was urgent, not unless everything was in place. I glanced at the screen. Ava Reynolds. I nearly ignored it. Almost slipped the phone back into my clutch. But then I remembered who I was and who I had become. This wasn't just a family dinner anymore. This was the final scene in a play I'd spent years directing. So I slid my phone onto the table. Screen up, let it ring one more time. Then I picked it up, slow and deliberate. I'm so sorry, I said, rising from my seat. I need to take this. Business. My mother let out a soft sigh, equal parts exasperation and embarrassment. Madison, honestly. During dinner, I took 2 steps away from the table. Not far. Just enough. Just enough to let the illusion crack. Hi, Ava. Go ahead, I said. Then paused. You're on speaker. Every fork froze. Every wine glass halted midair. Every pair of eyes turned to me. Ava's voice came through. Clear, calm, practiced. Miss Carter, sorry to interrupt, but we need your final go-ahead. The restructuring for Whittaker Dynamics is fully prepped. All termination letters are drafted. The board has signed off on removing Robert Whittaker, Chloe Whittaker, and the current executive team. Should we proceed as planned? A sound escaped Chloe, something between a gasp and a cough. Uncle Robert dropped his fork. Aunt Evelyn's wineglass hovered inches from her lips, trembling slightly. I turned back toward the table. I didn't smile. I didn't blink. I just said, yes. Ava, proceed as planned, and have security ready tomorrow morning. I want a smooth transition. Click. I ended the call. Silence. Real silence. The kind that roared louder than anything that had ever come out of their mouths. Not a single word. Just the weight of realization settling across the table like fog. I walked back to my seat, heels silent on marble, every eye following me. I picked up my linen napkin, unfolded it slowly, and placed it across my lap. Calm, controlled, certain. You? What did you just say? Uncle Robert's voice cracked like old glass. You're firing me. No, I replied softly. Carter's strategic group is. I'm just the one giving the order. Chloe looked like she'd forgotten how to breathe. Her eyes flicked from me to her father to the rest of the table, searching for something to anchor to. She found nothing. My mother's lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Even she, the queen of carefully crafted silence, couldn't spin this one. This was the moment I had built in silence. The power move I had never spoken aloud. Not in defense, not in argument, not even in triumph. I hadn't needed to, because now it spoke for itself. Ava's voice had sliced through every lie they told about me, every condescending smile, every backhanded compliment, every time they told the world I was small, mediocre, forgettable. And now, they were the ones being erased. Uncle Robert was the first to break the silence. What kind of stunt is this? Madison. His voice shook, not with anger, but with fear. Real, unfiltered fear. The kind that shows up when someone realizes they're no longer holding the pen to their own story. Across the table, Chloe had gone completely still, her manicured hand frozen in midair, gripping a fork that now looked more like a lifeline. She didn't speak. Her confidence, all pearls and privilege, was unraveling thread by thread. I reached calmly for my clutch, pulled out a black leather folder, and laid it beside my plate. It's not a stunt, I said softly. It's a transaction. One that's been in motion for the past 6 months. I flipped the folder open, revealing neatly tabbed documents. You're welcome to look. Here's the acquisition trail. Carter's strategic group acquired a controlling interest in Whittaker Dynamics through a series of shell companies. Clean, legal, strategic. Their eyes followed every movement of my fingers as I slid the papers across the table. Here's the board resolution. Unanimously passed. And here, I added, tapping a thick stapled packet, is a breakdown of executive mismanagement. Everything from financial negligence to nepotistic promotions. Chloe, your division alone accounts for a 28% decline in net productivity. No one spoke. The same people who had once talked over me, dismissed me, and laughed at my career were now staring at legal documents with their names printed next to the words, termination for cause. Madison, Aunt Evelyn said finally, her voice brittle. This is some sort of mistake. You've misunderstood something. We're family. I met her gaze. Exactly. And that's why none of you ever looked at me twice. You thought I was safe, predictable, harmless. I leaned back in my chair, voice steady. But while you were too busy measuring worth in job titles and dinner invitations, I was building something you couldn't see. Chloe finally found her voice. You don't have the authority. You can't just walk in and take over. I didn't walk in, I said, cutting in smoothly. I spent years working for this. I built a firm that now manages assets 3 times the size of Whittaker Dynamics. I negotiated, documented, and bought in, quietly, legally, completely. I picked up my fork and let it rest gently against my plate, across the table. Chloe's hand trembled, her fork clinking slightly as it slipped from her grip. They used to look right through me. Now they didn't know where to look. You called me mediocre, I said, voice quiet but sharp. You pitied me for choosing something as boring as human resources. But what you never understood is that people like me don't need a spotlight. We need leverage. And I have it. I glanced at the documents again. If you're wondering how you didn't see it coming, it's because you weren't looking. You never were. The silence returned, heavier than before. because now it was laced with truth. Undeniable, documented, and legally binding. This wasn't just a seat at their table anymore. It was their table, and I owned it. The silence didn't last long. Chloe shot to her feet so fast her chair screeched backward against the marble floor. Her voice rose, brittle and trembling. "This is a joke. You're bluffing. Madison, this isn't real." Her hands were shaking now, not with outrage, but panic. The kind that creeps in when the foundation you thought was unshakable begins to crack beneath you. Her face, once composed and camera-ready, flushed crimson. "You're lying," she snapped, eyes darting toward her father. "Dad, tell her she can't do this." Uncle Robert pushed his plate away with trembling hands. The wine he had once lifted in smug toast now sat forgotten beside him, untouched. His face had turned a deep shade of red, a color I'd seen before, usually when someone realized the room they walked into no longer belonged to them. He stood, slower than Chloe, but no less shaken. "This is corporate fraud. You've manipulated the board. I'll sue. I'll have your company investigated. You've made a serious mistake." "Madison." "No," I replied evenly. "I made a decision, and I documented every step." I reached into the folder and handed over the third document, the due diligence log, time-stamped and legally vetted. "You want to sue? Feel free. You'll find every transaction clean. Every vote is legitimate. Every accusation you're about to throw at me has already been anticipated, already answered." Chloe's hands balled into fists. "You think you can just walk in here and humiliate us?" "This isn't about humiliation," I said, keeping my tone level. "It's about accountability, something you've never had to face. Until now." She shook her head, her voice cracking. "This isn't how family treats each other." That made me pause, just for a moment. "Exactly," I said softly. "Family doesn't mock your ambition. Family doesn't condescend, belittle, or pretend you don't exist until they want something from you. And most of all, family doesn't hand out power like party favors to people who haven't earned it." Robert stepped forward, puffing up with the last of his fading authority. "This company is my legacy." "No," I replied, eyes steady on his. "It was your father's legacy. You just inherited it, and you ran it into the ground." He opened his mouth to argue, but no words came. He looked over at Chloe, his golden hair, now visibly unraveling, mascara smudging beneath her eyes. I let the moment breathe, let it settle in their lungs like smoke they couldn't cough out. The table that once served as a stage for their power was now a witness to their fall. They had nothing left. No leverage, no backup plan, no time, and I had everything. But I didn't gloat. I didn't shout. I didn't revel in their panic. I simply stood there, calm, poised, guiding them into the truth they had avoided for far too long. Their reign was over, and they were the last to know. Aunt Evelyn was the first to crack. As Chloe sat frozen in her designer panic and Robert clutched the edges of his crumbling authority, Evelyn reached for what she thought was still intact blood. "Lineage, sentiment. Madison, sweetheart," she began, her voice trembling with a softness she rarely used on me. "Let's not do this here. We're family." She said it like it meant something, like it could undo years of silence, of mockery dressed up as advice, of Sunday brunches where my name was only ever used as a warning. I looked at her across the table, at the woman who once told me I was wasting my degree, who had spent years pretending my absence was more comfortable than my presence. "Family," I echoed. She nodded, hopeful. I straightened my spine, but I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "Were we family when you said I settled for mediocrity?" Evelyn's lips parted, but no words came. "Were we family when Chloe offered me a job that didn't exist?" Just to humiliate me in front of everyone? Chloe's eyes flicked away. I turned toward Robert. Were we family when you laughed as I walked away from a guaranteed job at Whitaker Dynamics? Because I believed I could build something on my own. He didn't answer. He didn't even try. I turned back to Evelyn. No, we weren't family then. I was a failure, an embarrassment, a footnote you tried to ignore until tonight, until I became useful. The room was quiet again, but it was no longer shocked. It was exposed. Every smile they'd ever faked, every dismissive comment, every time they'd let me sit at the table but never in the conversation, all of it hung in the air now, undeniable and irreversible. They thought I'd come to dinner to ask for a seat. They didn't realize I'd come to flip the table. I folded the documents back into the folder and slid it into my bag, then rose from my seat. My chair made no sound. Unlike Chloe's earlier, there was no drama in my exit, no anger, only certainty. I think dinner's over, I said. Chloe didn't move. Robert's jaw was clenched so tightly I could see the vein in his temple. Evelyn had gone pale. I picked up my coat, the one they once mocked for being too expensive for someone in HR. I looked around the room one last time. They hadn't lost their company tonight. They had lost the illusion of control, and they'd lost it to the one person they never saw coming. The city was still waking up when I stepped into the lobby of Carter's strategic group. It was just past 7:30 a.m., and downtown Seattle glowed in soft hues of steel blue and amber. From the outside, everything looked ordinary pedestrians with coffee cups, a few delivery vans, clouds low and heavy like always. But inside, everything was shifting. I took the private elevator, the one with biometric access and no floor buttons, only one destination, the top. As I rose through the floors, I could see the glass facade of Whitaker Dynamics just across the street. Their building stood tall, but it looked different now. Hollow, somehow, like a nameplate waiting to be removed. When the elevator doors opened, Ava was already waiting, tablet in hand, composed as always. "Security's in position," she said without needing me to ask. Robert tried calling an emergency board meeting at 6:50. He didn't have a quorum. And Chloe, I asked, in her office, started shredding documents at 7:12. "We've got the surveillance feed backed up. Nothing critical was lost. We already copied everything last week." I nodded once, stepping into my corner office, the one that faced their boardroom directly. From here, I could see it all. Robert was pacing like a caged animal. His jacket off, sleeves rolled up, the illusion of command slowly slipping. His assistant stood nearby, uncertain whether to intervene. Every few seconds, he checked his phone. There were no calls left to make. And Chloe. I caught a glimpse of her through her window. Her heels were discarded, hair pulled back messily. She was rifling through drawers, moving in circles that didn't lead anywhere. The panic had set in. It struck me, for a moment, how poetic this was. All the years they told me I wasn't enough, that I'd made a mistake walking away, that I'd never build something of value. Now here we were. They are in chaos, and I, centered, still, certain. Ava placed a folder on my desk. "Board members are arriving on the Whitaker side. All confirmed. No one declined." "Perfect," I said. I walked toward the window, hands resting lightly against the frame, and took one final look at the company that used to define my absence. Not anymore. "Ava," I said, "make sure everything they touch this morning is documented. Files, emails, panned Hissical papers. I don't want them rewriting history." "Already on it," she replied. I smiled, just faintly. They thought they'd see me coming through the front doors, desperate, defiant, dramatic. But I didn't need to make a scene. I had an elevator. I had a team. I had time. Now, I had the company. At exactly 8:59 a.m., I stepped onto the sky bridge connecting Carter's strategic group to Whitaker Dynamics. The floor beneath me gleamed, polished marble, cool and quiet. Each step echoed like a countdown. I didn't rush. I didn't hesitate. I wanted them to hear me coming, one confident step at a time. The security guards stationed at the entrance to the boardroom, now contracted under Carter, stood straighter when they saw me. They didn't need instructions. They simply opened the glass doors. Inside, the room fell silent. Robert was already seated, gripping the arms of his chair like he could anchor himself in it if he just held tight enough. Chloe stood near the back wall, her phone in hand, but her fingers weren't moving. The screen was dark. So was her composure. The board members, 10 of them, turned as I entered. Some surprised, most not. They'd seen the paperwork. They'd seen the numbers. They knew why I was here. I walked straight to the head of the table, Robert's chair. I didn't look at him when I pulled it out and sat down. "Good morning," I said, voice calm, even. "Shall we begin?" "You have no right to be here," Robert snapped. His voice was tight, almost breaking. "This is a private board meeting." I didn't flinch. Instead, I opened my leather portfolio and placed it gently on the table. "Actually, I have every right. As CEO of Carter Strategic Group and now the majority shareholder of Whitaker Dynamics, this is exactly where I belong." Before Robert could respond, Ava stepped into the room and began handing out thick folders to each board member. "These," I continued, "contain detailed documentation of executive mismanagement, including falsified performance reports, misallocated funds, and personnel files manipulated to justify nepotistic promotions." Chloe let out a soft gasp as she flipped through the pages. Her name appeared again and again, linked to missing contracts, lost clients, botched vendor negotiations. I watched her fingers tremble as she tried to process it all. "This is a hostile takeover," Robert declared, looking to the board for support. "You all know me. I built this company." "No," I said, locking eyes with him. "Your father built this company. You inherited it, and you've treated it like a personal inheritance ever since." The board members shifted uncomfortably, because they knew. They'd seen the decline, the wasted talent, the internal chaos. They just hadn't known how to stop it. Until now, the vote was unanimous. I said, "All members of the executive team, including Robert Whitaker and Chloe Whitaker, are to be removed, effective immediately." "You can't do this," Chloe whispered, her voice breaking. "You're just prepared." I finished for her. "I'm prepared." She backed into her chair, stunned, the weight of reality finally settling in. Robert looked down at the documents in front of him, but his eyes didn't move. He wasn't reading. He was staring, frozen, beaten not by rage, but by proof. I had done this without shouting, without threats, without needing their permission, because real power doesn't ask, it arrives. The boardroom had never been this quiet. No one moved, no one argued. Even Robert, who once ruled this space with his booming voice and decisive gestures, sat still. His hands rested on the table, but his grip was gone. The folders in front of him remained untouched, as if reading them might somehow make the truth more real. That's when Aunt Evelyn appeared in the doorway. Her arrival was calculated, as always. Perfect timing, perfect posture, pearls strung just right. She held her designer handbag like a shield as she stepped inside, eyes darting between faces, trying to read the room she was late to understand. "Madison," she said gently, like we were at brunch, not at a corporate ousting. "Surely we can discuss this. We're family." The word landed like a whisper across a battlefield. I stood slowly from Robert's chair, the one I now occupied not just symbolically, but legally. I turned to face her fully. "Let's talk about family," I said. She straightened, ready for a sentimental appeal. But that wasn't what she got. "Let's talk about how this family laughed when I started my company. How no one took a single meeting I asked for. How you all paraded Chloe's every promotion at dinners, while pretending I didn't exist." Evelyn opened her mouth, but I didn't give her the space. "Let's talk about how Chloe was made senior VP with 2 years of mediocre experience, while 5 qualified candidates, including one woman who helped triple revenue, were pushed out quietly." I turned back to the board, letting the words settle on their shoulders. "Let's talk about how Robert hired his golfing buddies into leadership, signed off on blind investments, and masked losses with internal promotions to keep the narrative clean." No one interrupted, because they all knew. They had been silent witnesses, each of them complicit in the slow decay of something once respected. "This isn't about revenge," I continued. "This is about restoring something that mattered, before it was hijacked by favoritism disguised as tradition." Evelyn finally spoke, voice tight. "You're still part of this family, Madison." "No," I said calmly. "Family doesn't call you a disappointment behind closed doors. It doesn't treat your success like an accident. It doesn't pretend you don't matter until you control the room." She looked stunned, as if hearing those words aloud made them harder to deny. The board members said nothing, but they didn't need to. Their silence was its own kind of vote. Their silence was agreement. There was no shouting, no final protests, just a quiet knock on the boardroom door, and 2 uniformed security officers stepped inside. "Miss Carter," one of them said. "Are we clear to proceed?" I gave a single nod. "Yes. Escort Mr. Whitaker and Ms. Whitaker to HR. They can collect their personal items under supervision." The words landed with a finality that needed no explanation. Chloe let out a breathless, disbelieving laugh. "This is how it ends." Robert stood slowly, as if his bones had aged a decade in the last 20 minutes. He didn't argue, he didn't yell. He just looked around the room, at the board members who no longer made eye contact, at the walls that once framed his control, and then at me. He opened his mouth to say something, maybe to apologize, maybe to defend, but nothing came. Instead, he turned and walked toward the door, shoulders heavy, pride left behind in his now vacated chair. Chloe followed, heels clacking in a rhythm that sounded more like retreat than defiance. And just like that, the Whitaker era ended. The boardroom remained still. I gave closing instructions, outlined the next steps, and dismissed the meeting. Ava would handle the rest. As I stepped into the hallway, the quiet followed me like a second shadow. But just a few feet outside the boardroom, I saw them, my parents. My mother's eyes were red, swollen from crying, or maybe from holding it in too long. She stepped forward, unsure, searching my face for something she hadn't dared to hope for. "Why didn't you tell us?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. I looked at her, the woman who had always tried to smooth things over, who had stayed silent in every dinner conversation where I was dismissed, who never fought for me out loud. "Would you have believed me?" I asked gently. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Then my father spoke. His voice was soft but steady. "I didn't know what you were doing, exactly. But I always knew you'd do something great." I met his eyes. For the first time in a long time, I saw no doubt there, just quiet pride. "I always believed in you, Madison." My breath caught for half a second. Then I smiled. "Thanks, Dad," I said. "But the truth is, I don't need anyone to believe in me anymore." And I meant it. I didn't say it with bitterness. I wasn't angry, because this moment wasn't about revenge. It was about release. The version of me who once craved their validation. She was gone. The woman standing here now. She needed no permission to lead. The press called it a clean sweep. Shareholders called it a miracle. But I called it what it was: repair. In the weeks following Robert and Chloe's removal, Whitaker dynamics began to breathe again. The air in the offices felt lighter. Employees who used to walk on eggshells have now moved with purpose. The whispers in elevators shifted from dread to possibility. We didn't just change names on an org chart. We rebuilt the entire structure. I started by bringing in people who'd once been forced out. The quiet minds with bold ideas, the overlooked analysts, the forgotten leaders. We sat down together, no titles, just voices, and we asked one question. What would this place look like if it were built on merit, not legacy? Then we went to work. Departments were restructured. Promotions were based on performance, not bloodline. Contracts were renegotiated with transparency. The toxic favoritism that once strangled innovation was dismantled. One decision at a time. Within 4 weeks, the company's stock jumped 28%. By the end of the second month, it had doubled. Vendors returned. Clients who'd quietly pulled away called back. The market didn't just react, it celebrated. And the Whitakers. Chloe vanished from social media. Her once daily career updates fell silent. There were rumors of her living abroad, taking time to reflect. No apology ever came. None was expected. Robert tried to fight. He filed a lawsuit claiming improper removal. But our documentation was airtight. Months of preparation had built a wall too solid for his words to climb. The court dismissed it in under 2 weeks. He left the courthouse with the same stunned look he wore that night at dinner. The look of a man who thought his name would always be enough. Aunt Evelyn attempted something different: reinvention. She told anyone who'd listen that she'd always believed Madison had potential. At charity events and board luncheons, she spoke of my strong sense of leadership and vision beyond her years. As if her words could rewrite the years she'd spent dismissing me across candlelit tables. But no one listened. The business world had moved on. So had I. Carter's strategic group didn't just save a failing company. It restored a legacy that never belonged to the Whitakers in the first place. It proved that a name on a building means nothing if it isn't backed by integrity. And slowly, Whitaker Dynamics, restructured, rejuvenated, began to resemble the company it should have always been. Not a dynasty, but a place people wanted to belong to. Exactly 1 year later, the rooftop of the Carter building shimmered with gold light and the low hum of celebration. The penthouse ballroom had been transformed. Tall glass walls reflecting the Seattle skyline, music drifting over the city, and crystal glasses raised in honor of what many now called one of the greatest corporate turnarounds in a decade. Whitaker Dynamics, rebuilt, reborn, respected. I stood at the edge of the stage, notes in hand, though I didn't need them. The applause had just begun to fade as I stepped forward to speak. The audience was filled with business leaders, investors, innovators, people who once barely returned my emails, now hanging on to every word. And somewhere near the back of the room, seated just outside the circle of conversation, sat my family. Robert, Evelyn, even Chloe. They didn't speak tonight. They didn't interrupt. They simply watched. Silent. Still. I met their eyes only once. Briefly. No gloating. No malice. Just a quiet recognition. Not of who they were, but of who I had become. I spoke not of failure or revenge, but of resilience, of second chances, of what happens when a company chooses merit over bloodlines, and when a person chooses to believe in herself rather than wait for someone else to do it first. And as I closed my remarks, I looked out over the crowd, not down but across. Because this wasn't about standing above anyone, it was about finally seeing clearly. For years, they called me a disappointment, a nobody, a girl with small dreams and no place at the table. But I had built more than a company. I had built truth, stability, respect, and standing there, under the lights, on my own terms. I realized the most powerful revenge was never about making them regret. It was about proving to myself I was never a failure. I was the summit they could never reach. They once called me a failure. Now they sit on the sidelines, watching the woman they tried to erase rebuild the very legacy they thought they owned. But this wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about reclaiming my worth and never asking for their approval again. Because the best kind of justice doesn't scream. It arrives in silence and stays. If this story hit home for you, let me know in the comments. And if you're ready for more stories of quiet power and bold redemption, hit that subscribe button. We're just getting started.